Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I'm here at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico, and I'm here to take a look at some of the really cool geology, but also they got a great museum, a paleontology museum, as well as an anthro museum, an archaeological museum. Let's take a look in here, see what they've got, because it's a good summary of all the things that have been found here over the years since the 1940s, even the 1880s, actually. Georgia O'Keeffe is the person most commonly associated with Ghost Ranch, and she's the famous painter and artist who did a lot of landscapes and abstract art, and those landscapes were inspired by the surrounding geology, especially the Triassic Chinle Formation, which forms those red cliffs surrounding the area. On top of the Triassic, there's an unconformity, and there's a big pile of Jurassic sandstone. In this case, it's the wind-blown sand dunes of the Entrada sandstone. But the main attraction here is the Triassic deposits, and about 215 million years ago, this area was right near the equator on the supercontinent of Pangaea. This area was a big floodplain on the banks of a river system that was flowing to the northwest into the Pacific Ocean. And there was a whole variety of really amazing and unusual animals like phytosaurs and small crocodilians, and especially little dinosaurs like these guys, which are called Coelophysis. They were very small, bird-like things about the size of a coyote. And as we're going to see in the museum, a group of them, numbering in the hundreds or even thousands, met their untimely demise, only to be found again 215 million years later by paleontologists.
And here we go.
I've wanted to come here for a long, long time. This is the Ruth Hall Museum of Paleontology at Ghost Ranch. There's some spectacular displays here, including a block of Coelophysis material that's being prepped out as we speak. Not right now because they've gone off to lunch. But let's take a look around this museum. There's a lot of cool things to see. The first thing you'll notice when you walk into the museum is that there's a lot of information hanging on the walls in the form of posters. They have everything from historical information to things like this, the tree of modern vertebrate life, starting with fish and working all the way up to modern birds, how they fit in with dinosaurs, crocodilians, turtles, and lizards, and so on. There's some additional information about archosaurs, and there's two main lineages, one of which led to birds, the other one led to crocodilians. This is a phytosaur. It's on the lineage that led to crocodilians. It actually looks like a crocodile, but it's not. And these things are super common here in the Triassic in the desert Southwest. There's also a variety of things that are closer to dinosaurs, but not quite dinosaurs. And then the other main branch, of course, includes dinosaurs themselves and birds. So you could take some time, familiarize yourself with the really extensive terminology of these things. Moving along, we start getting into the geology of the area and some of the history of the finds. There's a really nice block diagram showing some of the stratigraphy and explaining concepts. This panel actually gets into Mr. Edward Drinker Cope himself.
Well, hello, Mr. Fancy Pants.
The guy who named a lot of fossils in the 1800s. He was instrumental in the Bone Wars. And he was responsible for describing and naming some of the first phytosaurs like this one. And he actually named Coelophysis, which was found here in the 1880s. Some people argue it's a non-diagnostic specimen, but the general consensus is that it's a recognizable taxon, so the name stays put. And having established that, we're going to keep moving along and learning more about the discovery of the quarry. There's all sorts of information here about how this mass bone bed of hundreds or even thousands of Coelophysis specimens was discovered, excavated, and even how it's being interpreted today. And in fact, there's a big chunk of it being prepped out, not at the moment because the prep people are at lunch, but there's still new discoveries coming out of it to this day. And take a look at this wall. Here it is. It's a replica of one of the most famous fossil specimens in the world. It's been covered in magazines like Life. You've seen it in all sorts of books and online. It's the classic Coelophysis with his neck arched back and his tail arched over its neck and head. The body's kind of contorted like this. There was actually a second one laying right next to it, but most of the times it's prepared like this, just as a single specimen. You know, they're not super big dinosaurs. That's the head. Here's the body, and the tail curves up and around. So the biggest ones are about 10 feet long, 3 meters. This one, not so much. This one's maybe about 6 or 7 feet, maybe 7 or 8 feet. Take a look at the skull though. Very lightweight, big teeth, sharp teeth. It's like a varanid lizard. It actually looks a lot like a Komodo dragon. I should mention this is a cast, by the way. This is a resin cast, so you probably shouldn't touch it too much, but if you accidentally brush up against it, it's not the end of the world. It's not a real specimen. Those are in the quarry block. And here's a little bit more information on that quarry that was discovered in 47. It's been excavated ever since, especially in the 80s. And take a look at this. This is really cool because there's a thing that I never heard of called Demonosaurus, as well as Ephegia. Most people haven't heard of this thing. It's a little crocodilian that mimics dinosaurs. It even has a toothless skull like ornithomimid dinosaurs. So the first examples of these types of animals, which were called Shuvosaurus, were originally misinterpreted as ornithomimid dinosaurs. Here's a skull of Ephegia. Again, a Triassic animal that looks like a Cretaceous dinosaur. But take a look at this thing. Demonosaurus with its big snaggle teeth. I never even heard of this thing until I came to the museum. It's a little skull. It's about 4 or 5 inches long, maybe 6 inches. But wow, look at the teeth on it. I mean, this thing would have had a really nasty bite if it glommed onto. It kind of looks like something that eats fish. It's got snaggle teeth like a gharial or some sort of fish-eating animal. And all that's known is the skull. So we don't really know what the rest of this animal looked like. But wow, what an interesting little creature it must have been. Here's a little Coelophysis skull by comparison. This is a juvenile. It's maybe only about 3 or 4 inches long. Would have been a cute little guy, but probably pretty bitey. So there's that. And now, we're getting some really cool stuff over here. This is like the cabinet of Phytosaurs. And Phytosaurs are primitive archosaurs. They look a lot like crocodiles and gharials, but they're not related. Their nostrils are actually up high on their head, not at the end of the snout. So those are the nostrils. It's got a long tubular snout. Crocodilian nostrils are at the end of the snout. These guys had them up in the middle of the face, almost like a whale, like a blowhole. And the primitive ones had these long, low skulls. The more advanced ones had heavier skulls, more robust like that. And even though this looks like an alligator, it's actually a giant amphibian. It's essentially a giant salamander mimicking an alligator. So there was archosaurs that looked like crocodilians that aren't really crocodiles. There was amphibians that looked like alligators, but they're actually amphibians. The Triassic was a wonderful, weird time. And then there's this thing. And again, I never even heard of this thing before I set foot in this building. It's an animal called Vanclevia, and it looks sort of like an alligator, sort of like a lizard. A beautiful, complete specimen, complete with scales, skull, from the tip of his nose to the tip of his tail. And it's interpreted as an aquatic animal, sort of like a marine iguana maybe, but it's probably eating fish, mollusks, things like that in the water. So again, never even heard of this thing before I got here, but it's a pretty interesting animal that was swimming around the Triassic rivers. And in keeping with our theme of things that look like other things but aren't really that, this looks like a flat alligator or maybe a really weird looking armadillo, but it's an archosaur, closely related to crocodilians. It's called an aedosaur. And these came in all shapes and sizes. Some were really round, but they're interpreted as plant-eating animals. And they were sort of superficially like an armadillo or a crocodile. And finally, speaking about crocodiles, here's one. This is what a Triassic crocodilian looked like. It's called Hesperoseuchus. Even though it looks like a crazy little dinosaur, this is what crocodilians actually looked like back in the Triassic. So crocodiles didn't look like crocodiles, Phytosaurs looked like crocodiles, but crocodiles looked like dinosaurs. They had long legs, very tall skulls, and probably ran around pretty quickly, like that, which is a real live dinosaur. This is a restoration of Coelophysis. Actually, it's not live, it's a statue, but it does look a lot like Hesperoseuchus. So similar agile body plan in both the dinosaur and the crocodile. So there's a lot of biological experimentation happening with morphotype, in other words, body shape and ecology in the Triassic. And here's a full skeleton of one of those Phytosaurs that we talked about before. This is an advanced Phytosaur, and man, it's got armor, it's got a long tail, short legs like a modern day crocodile. There's a little Ephegia back there. So it's a crocodile that's mimicking dinosaurs, sort of like Hesperoseuchus. The Triassic was kind of the age of the crocodilians, actually, and Phytosaurs. This, you can see that huge skull with the eye sockets and the nostrils in between the eyes. There's some petrified wood on the ground. And here's a little bit of an informational plaque detailing all the things hidden in this diorama. It's really cool. There's all kinds of little things hidden in there besides just the big skeletons and the sculptures. So here it is. You got some foreshortening, but this thing's about 4 feet long skull-wise. And body-wise, we're talking about an animal that's probably around, I guess, about 15 feet, 5 meters. Incidentally, there's this adorable little horseshoe crab collection down here, because there are freshwater horseshoe crabs in the Triassic, along with freshwater coelacanths and sharks. There's a lot of things that now live only in the marine systems, back then living in freshwater systems. Here's some more cabinets with information on Coelophysis, its discovery, the controversy over its name. I mentioned that before, that it's been argued that some of this material is not diagnostic, and somebody came along a few years ago and wanted to rename it as Rio or Ribosaurus, but that got shot down by the scientific community. Here's some interesting tidbits on another type of crocodilian type thing called Postasuchus. It's a big Rawasuchian. Again, things that kind of look like big dinosaurs like tyrannosaurs, but they're actually more closely related to crocodilians. So that's the gist of the museum. But wait, we're overlooking a very major chunk of the exhibit, and that's this beautiful, gigantic specimen. It occupies a huge chunk of the footprint of the building, and for good reason. It is an in-place example of a block from what's called the Coelophysis quarry, and in this block alone, there's a few hundred specimens of all age ranges, from little baby Coelophysis to adult Coelophysis. It's being actively prepared by the staff. You can see some great examples of, absolutely perfect skulls that are being pulled out of this block with little dentition, great preservation, and there's a tremendous variety of these guys. And of course a Far Side cartoon, because you know what Paleolab is complete without one. Now, I managed to secure permission to get a closer look at the block. So if you come to the museum and there's nobody around, please don't do this on your own. I am a professional, and like I said, I did get permission to get in here to get zoomed in and show you guys some of these really, really nice in-place specimens. Take a look at this. There's vertebral elements. In other words, this is part of the chest with the ribs still attached. Here's a foot with the toes still in place, each bone, each claw. The preservation is absolutely amazing on these things. It looks like these animals keeled over dead a few months ago, not 215 million years ago. And there are some really, really surprising and beautiful specimens, along with these long bones, ribs, and legs. Look at this, a baby. This is about a 3-inch long skull with the neck still attached. Look at the size of that eye socket, the tiny little teeth. There's his nostril. This really does look like something that only just recently died. Poor little thing, it makes you wonder what caused it to drop dead. But there's hundreds of these guys in this block. Again, little bitty guy. All right, so that does it for this brief tour of the Ruth Hall Paleontology Museum here at Ghost Ranch. There's also an archaeology and anthropology museum. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get to that because I'm on a tight schedule. I do have to get to Utah by the end of today. But if you're in the area, for sure, check this out. There's a lot to see. Normally, it's much busier, but I'm here at lunch. I really want to thank Catherine Ritter, who's the collections manager and supervisor of the museums here. She let me in to do this kind of walking tour and to look around. I'm going to go take a look at some of the rocks as well. So massive thanks to Catherine. She's awesome. They've got a great place here. I'm going to go look at some rocks. But as always, thanks for watching, and I promise next time I will see you on the outcrop. Take it easy.